Honey, I got you something.
All right, thanks. Um, Honey? Whoa. What's going on, folks? It's Landon from Today's Tech, and this is the iPhone 12 Pro Max, the Big Daddy, the Big Kahuna, the biggest and most expensive base model iPhone in today's lineup, and my first iPhone ever. It's crazy, right? I know. Believe it or not, before the 17 Samsung flagships, I actually wanted an iPhone. Obviously, it was all the hype. Everyone had one. So I had my eyes set on the iPhone 5, and it was actually a commercial for the Galaxy S3 that changed my mind and set me on a course to be a predominantly Android user. But hey, I figure it's 2021. Why not make this the year that I broaden my horizon and see what the iPhone has to offer? There's been numerous iOS iterations and numerous iPhone iterations since I last had my hands on a brand new iPhone when I worked at T-Mobile back in the day. So here's an Android user's thoughts on the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Okay, so I've been using the iPhone 12 Pro Max for about 6 weeks, and the first thing I want to talk about is the design, fit, and finish. So for quite some time now, we know Apple's strategy with design. They typically stick with a particular design for about 4 generations, then just introduce a few tweaks here and there. The iPhone 6, 6S, 7, and 8 all carried the same design language, and we're now into the 4th iteration of the latest cycle with the iPhone 10, 10s, 11, and 12 essentially carrying the same design, and Apple is just a beast at going back into their bag and reviving old design languages and features, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. So the flat side design is back, very reminiscent of iPhones 4 through 5s, but also taking some modern hints from iPad Pro. And I would say I have mixed emotions. On the one hand, it makes for a really secure grip, a durable design, less accidental touches, and a fuller viewing experience. But on the other hand, it's not as comfortable to use one-handed because of the sharper edges, and the paint finish attracts a lot of fingerprints. But even still, I think it's a very sleek and modern take on an old design language. And it's a pretty distinct look compared to the current slate of Androids. Apple clearly doesn't conform to industry standards in that regard. One thing that I do love is the size and placement of the power button. It's like twice the size of the S21 Ultras, and it's perfectly placed for my thumb. Now, the matte finish on the rear glass looks absolutely outstanding. I loved it when it debuted on iPhone 11 Pro. And last year, Samsung introduced what they call a satin finish for the rear glass, which still has a bit of a shine to it, and if you rub your finger over the finish on both, you'll notice that the iPhone actually has a much finer texture. But overall, I definitely appreciate the better fingerprint resistance of the iPhone, and the fact that the entire rear panel is milled from a single piece of glass, combined with the contrasting glossy finish of the camera module, just screams premium in my opinion. The matte glass slopes all the way up the sides to like a glossy plateau, with the wide, ultra wide, and telephoto cameras slightly protruding, resembling the old cinema cameras from back in the day. And then the cherry on top for me is the colored ring around each lens. I think it looks fantastic, and it goes to show that a slim camera module can still be a focal point of design, as we see Androids going all out on the size of the camera module. Now, keep in mind though, on the flip side, laying the 12 Pro Max on its back results in those protruding camera lenses being the first thing coming into contact with the surface it's on. Definitely something to be weary of. And lastly, from a design standpoint, I do think the notch is an eyesore, and I don't believe it's gotten any smaller over the past 4 iterations, so maybe that's a design enhancement we'll see in the 2021 iPhones. I don't feel like it ruins the design, and I can respect that it's a necessary evil for the benefits of Face ID for those that care, but yeah, overall, the iPhone 12 Pro Max is an excellent display of balancing the line between great design and great functionality. And I think it's a modernization and a refreshing feel that kind of breathes new life into the revived design language. When it comes to hardware performance, I'll continue on with Face ID, which I think performs pretty well in just about any lighting condition. It's always fast and accurate, but only when the phone is vertical, and if you're slightly off, not so much. Apple just needs to apply the same hardware they use in the iPad Pro, where Face ID works in any orientation. But really, I'd much rather like to see ultrasonic Touch ID underneath the display, especially this past year with the pandemic and the mask wearing. If I'm ever out and about and need to pay, Face ID is useless. So Apple can kill two birds with one stone by getting rid of the notch and offering way more convenience when it comes to unlocking our smartphone like 30 plus times a day. But to Apple's defense, when ultrasonic sensors first arrived, Face ID was significantly more secure. But now we're seeing a 1 in a million chance of tricking both Face ID and the current generation of ultrasonic sensors that we see from Qualcomm in Samsung devices. Okay, now let's talk about the display. And of course, you can't discuss the display without mentioning the notch. And as I said before, from a design standpoint, it is an eyesore. But to be honest, coming from a way less noticeable hole punch display, I was expecting for it to kind of constantly be in the way, but one, iOS is totally designed around it, and two, my eyes just adjusted after a while, and I honestly stopped noticing it. But aside from the notch, I found the display on the iPhone 12 Pro Max to be pretty fire. It's bright, it's sharp, contrasty, vibrant, and the colors are very accurate. When compared to the S21 Ultra watching 4K 60 frame per second HDR content on YouTube, I can only tell that the iPhone's display was just a little bit less bright, but the colors looked extremely similar, if not identical, so excellent display performance. But of course, I would prefer Apple's ProMotion 120Hz display technology featured in the iPad Pro, an advancement we're seeing in Android devices left and right of all ranges. But usually when the iPhone shows up late to the party, it shows up in style, so I expect Apple to absolutely knock it out of the park when they do bring ProMotion to the iPhone. And right now, I wouldn't call it a deal breaker simply because the fluidity of iOS 14 definitely makes up some ground. And I love that Apple seems to have a focus on putting out a stronger glass solution, having worked alongside Corning to create the new ceramic shield, which Apple claims is stronger than Gorilla Glass Victus, which is the latest offering that Android devices will be able to pick up from Corning, so definitely kudos on the display. Okay, now let's talk about day-to-day performance. So I was very excited to personally experience how well the iPhone performed with the A14 Bionic and just 6 gigs of RAM coming from the Snapdragon 888 with 12 gigs of RAM on the S21 Ultra. And it's honestly amazing how well optimized this chip is. In my typical everyday usage, I didn't notice a single difference in RAM performance, and iOS ran buttery smooth. I don't typically keep too many apps open, but general apps and games were able to keep up and stay open overnight, which is nearly on par with the experience I've had on the S21 Ultra. And the same thing is evident with battery performance. The iPhone 12 Pro Max has a 3,678 milliamp hour battery, while the S21 Ultra features a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, yet the overall experience was quite similar. Now, granted, the S21 Ultra's display is slightly larger, but you just don't typically see a battery of this size powering a device of this stature equate to this level of performance. I was averaging about 6.5 hours of screen on time, ending the day with about 25%, but one thing that I noticed was the standby time is really good. And something else that's really good is the vibration motor. Apple's Taptic engine in iPhone 12 Pro Max is definitely the best that I've experienced. It just seems like it's extremely well tuned, and it's kind of minor, but it's just something that I appreciate. Now, the speakers in the 12 Pro Max sound just like the speakers in the iPad Pro, just on a smaller scale. They sound very clear, just not as loud as I would like, which ultimately is not that big of a deal since I'm usually at home listening through bigger speakers. Now, a big part of Apple's marketing for the iPhone 12 was 5G, which I'm sure most of you have seen has not been all that it's cracked up to be in terms of speed and availability. My iPhone 12 Pro Max on T-Mobile's 5G network seems to struggle constantly, even though there's 5G all throughout my area. Now, my theory is that it's because of the stainless steel band on the iPhone and because of T-Mobile's low-band 5G in my area, which tends to have a greater reach but a much weaker signal. Thankfully, though, Apple is not charging any extra for the iPhone 12s due to the 5G, which Samsung seems to be doing, which is a bit unfortunate. All right, let's talk about these cameras. First of all, they totally look like those old school cinema cameras, and I bet that's exactly what they were going for. These cameras are very good, and obviously it comes down to the combination of the image signal processor, the A14 Bionic, and the machine learning that Apple uses to analyze each aspect of a particular scene. For example, I can clearly see the work of smart HDR when I take photos in a lot of light, like in these examples. However, when shooting directly into the sun, it's very good at containing the highlights, but then it struggles with dynamic range in the foreground, as you can see in this side-by-side with the S21 Ultra. I also noticed that it sometimes seems to not know when to apply Smart HDR. In these photos, we were in the exact same spot, yet completely different results. Now, when it comes to deep fusion, there's no indicator that a photo was actually processed using deep fusion, and I'm actually having a hard time to tell when it's used because in lower light situations when it should activate, I'm still seeing a lot of noise instead of crisp detail. And when it comes to taking photos of skin with the front or rear cameras, the iPhone 12 Pro Max does really well with highlights, again, thanks to Smart HDR. And when it comes to portrait photos of people and random subjects in great lighting, I noticed a very natural blur that mimics mirrorless lenses, and I was surprised to find out that there are no night portraits from the front camera. So this is what I got in a side-by-side with the S21 Ultra. Now, with night mode, I can appreciate the fact that it's enabled automatically, and that's actually how it was originally on Android devices, but apparently too many users complained, and so now it's a separate camera mode. But I can definitely see how having it enabled automatically makes for a much simpler experience for someone who just wants to whip their phone out and take a picture in any lighting. But overall, night mode photos look okay. Like, look at these photos side by side with photos from the S21 Ultra. They both have some noise, but the water looks really noisy on the iPhone. And in this photo, they're both noisy, but peep the dynamic range on the S21 Ultra compared to the iPhone on the bridge. However, in shots like these, it does a fantastic job of keeping the sky pure black, eliminating noise, and accentuating the foreground. Now, the addition of the LiDAR scanner is what helps make night portraits possible by mapping out the environment, and the resulting images come out pretty good, although I didn't notice a difference when comparing to the S21 Ultra, which doesn't have the sensor. And photos from each camera are very consistent in terms of color and sharpness, and I can appreciate that photos tend to look a bit punchier with more contrast than I'm used to on even the S21 Ultra, really kind of furthering the concept of point and shoot by eliminating the need to edit. A lot of photos are Instagram ready right out of the camera. And the same goes for video. This phone is an absolute beast when it comes to video, in the daytime at least. Colors are vibrant, dynamic range is solid, and the footage is just very sharp. And switching between the lenses is really smooth instead of a little bit jittery on the S21 Ultra. And even at 4K, the image stabilization is clearly on point, and that's thanks to Apple's new sensor shift optical image stabilization. So the sensor itself moves to counter your movements as opposed to the lens moving like we saw on previous iPhones and all Androids. So overall, I would say they take very good photos in most conditions that are not oversaturated and are very well balanced. However, I can't ignore those occasional missteps by Smart HDR and the abundance of noise in low light environments. So they didn't quite live up to the hype in terms of photos, but video, on the other hand, in daytime at least, they definitely lived up to the hype. But I mean, as great as these cameras are, it's not impossible to push this hardware to its limit. At the end of the day, these sensors are tiny when compared to the sensors of mirrorless cameras, so there will only ever be so much that they can do. And with that being said, we know that the quality of these cameras is definitely a testament to Apple's computational photography and the processing power that the A14 provides. All right, now iOS. So over the years, pretty much the only difference between iPhones and Androids was the software experience. Androids are freer, feature-rich, and customizable, whereas iOS is more restrictive but extremely well-tuned. And this is my first time experiencing it on a day-to-day basis, and the first things that caught my attention were, one, how good the UI looked, and two, how smooth and fluid it operated. Animations are quick and snappy, and just navigating around the UI is very pleasing. It just seems very complete and very well thought out, and it just looks really good. Now, I will say that I am not a fan of the fact that apps automatically sort to the top of the display. as phone sizes increase and aspect ratios become taller, it just doesn't make any sense for actionable items to be at the top of the display. Which leads me to my next iOS gripe, and that is the back button situation. I am just not a fan. I feel like you should always be able to go back by swiping from the sides like on Android 11, as opposed to sometimes having to reach the top left corner of a 6.7-inch display to go back. I think Apple needs to go back to the drawing board on this one and take a page out of Samsung's book and make the UI accommodate the size of the device it's running on. Samsung has set a fantastic example with this in OneUI, where the actionable items that you tap on are at the bottom of the display. But aside from that, I'm glad to finally see widgets on an iPhone. And like I said before, when the iPhone shows up late to the party, it shows up in style. And I actually prefer Apple's widget customization UI over Android's. It's very clean, and it actually gives you a super brief description of the widget, something that is still missing on Android's. And then the Smart Stack puts it over the top, where you can get a widget relevant to how you typically use your phone throughout the day. And this is just the first example of Apple implementing an Android feature better than Android. The second is app screen folders. So of course, Androids have had an app screen with the ability to create app folders since the beginning, except the feature for the most part has been pretty stale. Well, in comes Apple with automatically categorized app screen folders. And this to me is such a nice touch, and it actually compelled me to manually organize my S21 Ultra's app screen to look the same. But I guess when you sit back and observe features that already exist on other operating systems, you're bound to think of a better implementation, and that's what we see routinely from Apple, from hardware to software. Now, smaller things like quick access to Finder just by swiping down, swiping right for Today View, and password autofill, these features feel fully developed, and they help make the experience that much more enjoyable. Okay, so coming from Android on the S21 Ultra, we're natively blessed with Google Assistant and Bixby. Now, Bixby is excellent for internal commands like adjusting settings, and Google is excellent for external commands like seeking information. And I feel like Siri falls somewhere in between. In my testing, Siri was great for internal commands, but okay at external commands. But contrary to popular opinion, I don't think Bixby is useless, and I don't think Siri is useless either. You just have to know which to use and when. But I will say that I'm glad that it's possible to rig Siri to use Google Assistant. And another thing that I appreciate is that Control Center is separate from notifications, but I am absolutely not a fan of how notifications are done in iOS. Seems like I always have tons of notifications that build up over the course of days, and it's not as simple as just swiping it away as it is on Android. But all in all, the main differences I'm noticing between iOS and Android/OneUI is that features and functionality on iOS seem to be very well thought out, as opposed to some features on Android and OneUI feeling a little bit half-baked. And of course, the new anti-tracking privacy features are excellent, and that's something I do not think Android will be able to match, given that a large portion of Google's business is based on tracking your usage and then serving relevant ads. All right, and lastly, I want to briefly touch on the walled garden. That is the Apple ecosystem. So I already had a 27-inch iMac and an iPad Pro, but with the 12 Pro Max, I also bought AirPods Pro and Apple Watch Series 6. And the overall experience was great, to be completely honest. Of course, the way everything syncs and communicates across devices is an excellent feature, but this is no longer an advantage of Apple over Android. Literally every single ecosystem feature that's present on iOS now exists on Android, and more specifically Samsung devices. So Android has definitely taken some major strides when it comes to creating that Apple level ecosystem, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here, obviously with Apple adding the AirTag to the lineup and then Samsung adding the Smart Tag to the lineup. And now it's an arms race for who has the better ecosystem. So again, this was my very first iPhone ever, and my wife's first since the 7 Plus, after having 5 Androids in 4 years. And for me, the overall experience was really good. There's a very premium vibe going on, from the hardware to the operation and looks of the software. The design is nice, the display is on point, the cameras are for the most part on point. iOS is on point, and the ecosystem is on point. I of course think the overall lack of customization is a bummer, but I do think Apple has made some progress with the addition of widgets and the app screen. But I must say that I do now have the desire to have the latest Apple devices alongside the latest Android devices at my disposal. So kudos to Apple for earning, and I do mean earning, another ecosystem user. I didn't find a single thing that would make me say no to this device as my daily driver. And with that being said, thank you so much for supporting the channel by sticking around until the end. I really do appreciate it. If you found my perspective interesting or informative, then you gotta go smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you can be the first to know when I'm bringing a brand new perspective to your favorite pieces of tech. Alrighty guys, that's all for now. Peace and love.